Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we'll explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. I am super excited to be here with one of my favorite people, Carissa, and she is coming to us from the USA in Colorado. And I'm just really excited to finally be able to sit down and have this type of a conversation with Carissa. So, Carissa, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about, tell us who you are and how you'd like to be known and anything else you'd like for us to know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gosh, it's hard to fit me into a nutshell, but I'll say, my name is Carissa Carbon. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a walking paradox and a proud weirdo. I really love deep discussions about humanity and philosophy. I delight in the feel of sunshine on my skin and the unadulterated joy that we see in dogs. I believe that love is the greatest force in the universe, and I aim to embody that belief in everything that I do.
Nice. So many cool things there. And you had me at dogs. I love dogs, even though I'm really a cat person. But I also just love how you kind of claim all of these different facets of yourself. Like you said, I think you said something about kind of being a weirdo and like just owning that, which is really cool.
It didn't happen overnight. It's taken me years to get here.
Nice. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. You and I have talked about so many things over this year and a half that we've known each other. And it's usually kind of like we're in kind of like a coaching space, or we're kind of acting as coaches with each other and everything. So today it's kind of exciting to just like hear your story and be the listener. And there may be times where it's like you say something that I'm really curious about and I might want to dig deeper into, or maybe challenge you on something. So I'll jump in from time to time with your permission and, maybe do a little bit deeper exploring with something that you share with us, if that's okay.
Please do. I've never walked away from a conversation with you feeling like I didn't enjoy myself. So I welcome all of it.
Awesome. Well, you and I haven't talked about what you're going to be sharing with us. So this is going to be new for me as well. I just say that every time because, I just want people to know that there's no part of this that's rehearsed in any way, shape, or form, because I believe so strongly in kind of the natural storytelling and the sharing of experiences, honestly. Before we get into the 5 questions, I would love to know, what intention do you have for yourself today? What is your intention for this conversation?
I think my intention is really just to show up in a raw and vulnerable way, because I think that, especially in today's society, especially in Western culture, we tend to wear these masks. We tend to, want others to think highly of us, or we want to control the perception that people have of us. And so my intention is to just be present, raw, and very human.
Okay, nice. The human piece is so important to me as well. And my intention for our conversation today is to give you space to share whatever you feel like needs to be shared, and to hopefully give you the space to share an experience that touches someone else and helps someone else feel a little bit more okay with their own experience and a little bit more connected to others, so that, someone else, or maybe several someone else's, feels a little bit less alone out there. So let's dive in with the first question. Where have you found yourself sitting on a comma in your life?
I am currently sitting on a very large comma. And I'll be honest, Paul, at this point, it feels a lot more like a semicolon. It's required a lot more of a pause than I initially thought, or that a comma might indicate. But, the comma's still there in the semicolon. So I think I'm there right now when it comes to my relationship and my orientation towards purpose.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what is happening for you on this comment? That's a little different than the next question that's going to come, but like elaborate on what is the situation? What makes it feel like a pause, however big, it feels for you, or however long it's been going on? Like, tell us a little bit more about the situation.
Yeah, I'd say, for years, especially as an adult, as I got into the workforce and into my career, I've always had a very strong orientation towards purpose and impact. I've always wanted to show up in a way that I can maximize my impact and have a really significant impact on people. And it's been really interesting because over the last few years, especially, I'd say the comma that I'm on right now, with momentary lapses, has been here for the last 3 years. So it's been quite a long pause, but really reshaping, unlearning, relearning what is truly my purpose versus what was I conditioned to believe? What was I conditioned to want? And what I'm finding is that there are elements of how I've thought about my purpose that continue to be true because they do feel like authentic parts of who I am. But what I've found is that so much of what I was really striving for and hustling toward doesn't really ring true with me anymore. So I'm in this position now where I guess I kind of had this assumption that as I cleared away the parts that were not me, as I unlearned conditioning, as I did some very deep trauma healing work, I had this assumption that as I cleared that space, almost like digging a hole in the sand, as soon as the wave comes in, it fills the hole that you've just dug. And I think I had this assumption that as soon as I cleared the way, all the parts of me that gave me clarity around my purpose, that they would just naturally pop up or show up. And what I've found is that hasn't quite been the case. I have these indicators, I have passion, I have these values, but in terms of really having clarity on my next step, what is it that I'm meant to do next? It's been a little hard. I have like a long-term vision that has, I've downloaded, if you will. I have this long-term vision that I know will take years to bring about and to create. And so right now I'm kind of in this liminal space of, okay, well, I can't fully step into my vision and my long-term dream that I believe will help me fulfill my purpose, but I still need to exist in the system today. And I still need to live with the choices I've made that have led me here. What I mean by that is when it comes to working in the corporate world, I'm a consultant and I have spent a decade in the corporate environment. And as I grow, as I come home to myself, I find that a lot of my values and my priorities don't necessarily align to mainstream corporate culture. So I'm kind of in this space right now, this pause of figuring out, okay, how do I not just survive, but how do I truly thrive? How do I live in my integrity and align to my own values and priorities in a way that helps me still successfully navigate the current system while knowing that I'm going to put energy towards my long-term vision?
You've described a number of things, so I'd love to take just a moment and kind of reflect back some of what I've heard from you, and even maybe posit some deeper kind of noticings, right? So what I'm hearing you say is a couple of things. Like, first of all, this sense that that being on pause or sitting on a comma might have a certain time frame that's associated with it, and you're like, it's been 3 years. So packed in that is there's this element of like, how long does one have to sit on a comma, right? Then I also hear you, which by the way is so common. Like, I hear not only my own experience, but so many people, like, we all kind of operate under this unspoken assumption that there's kind of a specific or magic kind of time frame, and it's really not true at all, right? As you identified, and then what I really hear from what you saying in everything that you shared is, I feel a calling towards something. You use the word purpose, and yet I'm not really clear enough on it to recognize the difference between, is this my purpose or is this a purpose that's been influenced by something outside of me that might not really be an authentic purpose? And then there's all of these other things that you described that kind of come along with it. So it's kind of like this whole, I feel stuck because I don't really know where I'm going. I don't really know where I'm going because I'm not really clear on what that is any sooner than this long-term vision. And then here's all this other stuff that comes with it. So I'll just kind of like correct me where I've misstated anything.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the reflection. I think the only thing that I would clarify, at least how I experience it, is when it comes to the not knowing in terms of like my authentic purpose or calling versus, conditioning or anything like that. The way I feel is it's more like the authentic purpose is there and has always been there, but there were a lot of layers on top of it that kept me from living into it fully or believing I was even capable of it, if you will. So there have been a lot of limiting beliefs, a lot of conditioning that I've needed to unlearn, let go of, and frankly, that I'm still in the process of letting go of. Mm-hmm. In order to fully live into this calling or this purpose. Because I think that the way I like to think about a lot of the work that I've done is kind of like paradigm shifts, right? And once I've experienced something or seen something, there's no way of going back to the old way. Mm-hmm. But for me, it feels like I'm cognitively in the new paradigm and I'm working on emotionally and somatically and spiritually getting there. But that is the part that has taken me a lot longer. And I've learned, I've had a deep appreciation now for the time, for the effort and the energy that it takes to not just get something in my brain, but to truly feel it, live it, and experience it. So I think it's more kind of a layered, like almost like a parfait, and I'm peeling back the layers as I go, as opposed to, as you were reflecting back, the image that came up for me was almost like a authentic or inauthentic. And for me, it's a yes and.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you said, right, like a couple of other things too, like as you said, there's this sense of kind of exploring and seeking and pursuing, right? And in my day life or my day-to-day life, where I have to apply this is for most of us, right, is our work is a big part of what we do. And even there, you said like, that's what creates some of the conflict for you. Conflict is a word I chose. And you tell me if there's a better word, but some of the conflict or some of the lack of clarity is like, and in my day-to-day, my work, it manifests there because there's these feelings of like showing up the way I want to. Does this align with my purpose and so forth? And before I turn it back over to you, I want to, for the benefit of those who are listening, what I know about you and they don't necessarily is that you have been on an inward journey for some period of time, for at least these 3 years. You have been doing a lot of intentional work, specifically taking action on exploring parts of yourself, like you said earlier, traumas, experiences, and so forth. So you've come to this place through a lot of action on your part too, right? Like this isn't just something that you just showed up and suddenly, the tea you drank last night made you this way. Like this is all a part of and a product of this work that you have been doing, this inner work and kind of exploration for these years, right?
Yes. I think that's a great call out. So briefly, I went through a divorce about 11 years ago that as I was leading up to the divorce, that's when I really started to first question the matrix, if you will. I love to use the phrase, unplugging from the matrix. I love it. And so that was for me, my first experience of sort of that disconfirming experience of thinking, well, I thought I was supposed to do X and it's making me miserable. So maybe there's another route. Maybe there's another path. So that happened about 12, 13 years ago. And so since my divorce 11 years ago, I've been very intentional about going deep within myself. I've read a lot of books, consumed a lot of content. I've attended workshops. I've worked with multiple coaches and therapists. So yes, I do think that's worth clarifying that this is not my first foray into deep reflective work.
Yeah. And yet you, as you've said, right, you're feeling like you're sitting on a comma, you're on pause because not that, and you've shared this with me before, right? I'm not making this up. Not that that work hasn't had tremendous benefit for you and hasn't had tremendous value, but you're still where you're sitting right now. You are experiencing still some lack of clarity and some, as you said, kind of like not really having this clear sense of the purpose and then the things that it creates.
I think for me, rather than saying, I'm still experiencing this, I mean, I certainly do believe that this is an ongoing journey. I don't ever believe that I will reach a finish line and kind of wipe my hands and say, all right, I'm fully developed. I've figured it all out. Like, I don't think I'm headed towards that. But I think for me, what I would clarify is that every up level in my growth, every awareness that I've created, every paradigm shift that I've gone through has led me to this moment. And so for me, it's not an orientation of, okay, not that you are implying this, but I think this is something I hear a lot. For me, it's not, okay, let me check the boxes towards enlightenment or towards awareness or consciousness so that I can be done or complete or perfect or whatever word we want to use for it. For me, it's a deep appreciation for the accumulation and the necessity of every step and every experience on my journey that has led me here. Because what I will say is, while it is deeply uncomfortable at times, I am incredibly grateful for how my relationships have changed. My awareness about myself has changed. Everything in my life has gotten deeper and richer as a result of getting to this point. And so I think that's worth pointing out, because while it is uncomfortable, I do not think that it's bad to be where I am. And I think that oftentimes we conflate, we judge, right? We think if it doesn't feel good, then it's not good. Whereas I've learned to adopt this mindset that everything that happens in my life is good, because it either feels good or it's good for me.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate you calling that out, right? Because my reflections aren't always that I'm just reacting and responding to things. What you said, though, is because I'm here doesn't mean it's bad. And I think that's such an important call out. Like, every guest brings not only their own personal stories, but this kind of one little revelation about what it means to sit on a comma and what it means to get off the comma. And I love this piece that you're bringing into it, is like, because I'm here and because I'm talking about this doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I may or may not want something different from this, but it doesn't mean it's bad. So I appreciate that call out. I think that's really a big thing to share. And I'll segue into our next question, which is, given what you've shared with us and the unpacking of it, like, what is this creating for you in your life?
I think for me, this is creating a lot of opportunity to really get clear on, I said earlier, I've been intent on impact. And I think something that I've created awareness around is I tended to disregard or dismiss micro impact, these interactions that we have on a day-to-day basis with individuals. I used to think only in terms of large scale impact, and sitting on this comma has given me the opportunity to reevaluate how I show up with every single human being that I have the opportunity to come in contact with, because I'm used to, maybe center myself, and I would think, how am I feeling in this moment? How am I being impacted? What do I want? And now I've been able to expand that awareness, if you will. And so now when I go into an interaction with an individual, I'm thinking about impact, and I'm thinking about how do I be present in this moment? Not because I want to think my way through the interaction, right? I want to feel, I want to be in that relationship and in that interaction. So I think it's opened up a lot of avenues for awareness, a lot of opportunities to question how I show up, what I want in this world. And I've seen a strengthening in the relationships that I have by questioning this, by maybe shifting how I show up differently sometimes because I've become more aware of it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, and I don't want to press you into anything. Certainly you don't have to, name any names or anything like that. But I think a lot of times, when we have conversations like this and share what you've just shared, there are some people who, well, and when I say some people, I mean me, because I do this sometimes, right? It's like, what does that look like? What do you mean when you say that? I'm wondering if you can give a pretty simple example in your life of how you've showed up differently. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah. So I think it might help before I give the specific example is just to get maybe a little more specific about the comma, right? Because I'm talking in kind of lofty, abstract terms about purpose and career and all of this. And so for me, my very strong priority is to show up as a loving human being in every interaction. And I find, probably comes as no surprise, right, that in business, love, heart forward thinking is not necessarily the soup du jour, right? We tend to be thinking about, get things done, take action, accomplishments, money, right? It's all about the bottom line. And we see, especially in corporate culture, a lot of practices that I would argue are very harmful at the human being level. And so that's something that I didn't have an awareness or an appreciation for a decade ago in my career. And so I'm seeing a lot of ways that businesses, corporations treat the human beings inside these organizations does not serve their highest good, does not take into account caring for them, worrying about or thinking about their well-being, right? Unless it gets in the way of making money, right? We think about going on a performance improvement plan, in corporate lingo. If people are not performing to your expectations, then we put attention on it and we say, what are you doing wrong, right? You need to do this, you need to do more. And I'm seeing a lot of ways that people are being harmed in this system. And so to come back to the specific example, I was on a work project a few months ago, and I wasn't having a great experience because of the role that I'd been put into on the project. And in the past, I would have said something. I would have been very bold, very direct about the experience I was having, why it was not okay, what I expected to be different. And I did it under this guise of, I need to look out for me. I need to speak up. I need to use my voice. And not to say that all of those things aren't still true, right? I'm still very bold and very direct. But in the past, I would have thought only about the experience that I was having and what I could do to change it. So through sitting on this comma, what has opened up to me is in this particular example, I still raised my voice. I still shared the fact that I was not having a good experience because to me, the real value in that moment was to own my truth instead of remaining quiet or suppressing it. But the difference was now when I said that, nothing actually changed. The dynamic with the project didn't change. The dynamic with the client didn't change. And I was still able to show up as a contributing positive energy on the team because I knew that speaking my truth was the really valuable thing in that moment. But if I continued to hold on to my frustration in that moment, then I was going to have a negative impact on the people I was working with. And because of the awareness, again, another thing that it's brought into my life is I was able to take a step back and say, yes, I need to say something for my own well-being so it doesn't feel like I'm choking on my own voice. And I'm not the only one on this project. So I was able to take a step back and say, wow, the project leader is having a really hard time with this client. And this subject matter expert that we've pulled in, she's running ragged, trying to meet all the demands of the client. So I was able to zoom out and have that perspective so that, yes, I still said what I needed to say, but how I showed up after was night and day. I was still able to be supportive. I was still able to be loving. Not in every moment, right? I'm a human. I screw up. I make mistakes, but I own those mistakes and I hold myself accountable to them, because that priority of showing up as a loving energy for everybody, that is a gift that I'm very grateful for.
Mm. You know, there's so much packed into this example and so many opportunities for reflection for any of us who are listening. And so I'll run with this for a second. Is like, for me, what I hear, if I apply it to my own circumstances, right, is in the past, if I got to a point where I had to speak up and say, this isn't working for me, or I feel a certain way about this or whatever, then it was usually at a point where I'm saying it because I need somebody else to fix it, change it, or this just has to be different, right? So there was kind of like a request in there, or even perhaps a demand in my own situations, right? And that the speaking implied that there had to be a fix and that somebody else was going to fix it. What I'm hearing from your example is, oh, and by the way, and if I chose not to speak, then it was kind of the old suck it up, get over it, quit being so selfish, right? But from what I'm hearing you say in your example with your situation is that you had lots of different options for how you could have approached it, the ways you may have done it in the past. You still spoke up. You didn't attach yourself to an expectation of an outcome from speaking up, other than I needed to release this, and it doesn't have to change how I show up. And in fact, in your case, you said I might have even shown up a little bit more empathetically for others on the team because of how I felt.
Exactly. You nailed it on the head, Paul. I think, have you ever had this thought of, well, there's no point in saying something because it's not going to change anything. And that for me is a recipe for frustration and resentment, because then I'm having all of these feelings, even though I haven't said anything about them. So then they just stew in me. And so exactly to your point, by speaking my truth in a way that I knew the value was in saying the words I needed to say, because for me, it was a way to release the frustration, release the resentment, because people aren't mind readers, right? Yeah. So how could they know the experience I was having if I didn't share it with them? And so for me, the value was, okay, I said my piece. But then because I used to be so attached to outcomes, I would have only been happy if I got the outcome that I wanted. But in this case, nothing changed. I made the request. I did make a request in that conversation that was not responded to, or, maybe they weren't able to, right? Maybe it was outside of their span of control, if you will. But because I said the thing I needed to say and reminded myself of my intention and my priority to show up for the human beings with whom I was interacting, you're absolutely right. I was able to let go, release those frustrating feelings, and show up, to your point, probably more empathetically and more understanding after that.
Oh my God. And it's like, what comes up for me is, especially when you said, what's the point of speaking up? Not exactly a direct quote, but you said, like, what's the point of speaking up if it's not going to change anything? It's not going to fix anything. And it's so funny because that's so ubiquitous in our society, right? You can't change the system, but it's like, but in speaking up, you may not change the system, but you may change something for yourself, or you may change something in yourself, right? And recognize that we are the system. So the only way the system will change is if we all individually start to make change, right? And even if we just stay on this vein of thought of, okay, so if there's 10 of us in the room and 7 of us speak up and we're not happy with the situation, but it still doesn't change, at least we're all clear on where everybody stands, right? And who's to say that you can't make change? And
who's to say you can't make the change? Yes.
Yeah. And it really, what I'm hearing you say, and of course I'm self-referencing a little bit because this is so important in my own world, right? But like, My coach trainer, Cami, taught us this technique, in coaching that we'll do with clients. And it's called the complaint request model, right? Because a lot of times we'll be unhappy with something. And, I don't even like saying we complain because, there's labels and stigmas attached to that. But it is, by its definition, I'm not happy with something and I say something, that is a complaint, right? Okay. And there's no judgment in that. I have a complaint. What she taught us and that we do with clients is that if you have a complaint, then what's your request, right? Because if you have a complaint, it's understood that there's something probably that you want to change there. And so the complaint request model is if you find yourself in a situation of having a complaint, then you come up with a direct request and like, for whom is the request, by when, what are you asking for, and so on and so forth. As you yourself said, right? Like maybe they can't fix that, or they won't fix that, or they're constrained, or what have you. The point isn't just in the getting your request fulfilled. The point is in making the request. And what does that do for you, right? And that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, because for a few reasons, right? I think one, because if I choose not to use my voice and speak my truth, I am by virtue saying, you know what? Your comfort or your perspective, your experience is more important than mine. And so I believe it's not only disempowering in that regard, but it's also disempowering if you really think about it. I have done this and I still continue to do this. So I'm not saying that I've totally gotten out of it, but I find it to be very disempowering when I let circumstances dictate my mood. And what I mean by that is, okay, well, I'm only going to feel happy if I get the outcome that I wanted. Well, gosh, there's so many complexities, so many different things at play for us to try to control this world and have exactly the experience that we want. Wow. I don't know about you, but pretty much everyone I know says their life isn't how they planned it, right? Things get thrown at us. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with that phrase of, it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. But that's something that I've really been internalizing lately is even if I don't get what I want, I can still show up in joy. I can still be present. I can still enjoy the experience that I'm having or look for the lessons and opportunities in it. And so it's less about controlling the circumstances or the outcome and more about trusting my intuition, trusting my heart, and trusting my voice, and trusting that whatever needs to happen as a result will happen. Because the other thing that I think is a result of, especially today's culture, is our instant gratification, right? We think about, we were talking earlier about how long do I have to sit on this comma, right? There's a desire to get off the comma and move forward. But I think too, just in terms of time scale, okay, maybe me saying something in that conversation didn't fully change the circumstance or the outcome, but maybe I planted a seed, right? Maybe someone listening in that conversation said, wow, Carissa had the courage to own her voice in this moment. That's inspiring me to go have this hard conversation with my spouse or my kids or my boss or whoever it is, right? We don't know the seeds that we plant in every single interaction.
Right.
And so I believe that that's why showing up as a source of love is so important to me, because I don't know the downstream impact, but I do know that when I interact with someone who is joyful, who is positive, who is open, I walk away from that interaction feeling a lot better than when I interact with someone who is, rude or curt or clearly frustrated about something. And so I think about that a lot in terms of, even if it's not about creating the outcome that I wanted, if I can trust my intuition and my heart and my own voice, then maybe I'm saying something in this moment that you needed to hear. And I could have no way of knowing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and intuition being a big part of that too, right? Like sometimes you just know that it needs to be said. You may not know exactly the most delicate way to say it or the right timing or whatever, but you'll know when something needs to be said and when maybe probably doesn't. Right. But, I grew up in the training and development profession, teaching classes and seminars and workshops and things like that. And that's one of the basic premises of adult learning and adult teaching, right? Is like, ask the question, because it's not just you that you may be asking the question for, right? You talk about planting seeds, when you speak up, you might be speaking on somebody else's behalf as well, who didn't have the courage to say the thing. That's awesome. So our next question, Carissa, is, you already acknowledged you're sitting on this comma, you're kind of working with this and processing through this. So what are you learning about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma, or what have you learned?
So many things. I think for me, because this is such a big comma, because purpose has been such a big facet in my life, I think there's been a lot to unpack. And so I've been learning a lot. I think a few things that come to mind are, one, I've known for a long time that I had a fraught relationship with control, that I really like to be in control of things. And so one thing that has been a really interesting awareness that I've learned about myself is even the idea of wanting to have a positive impact in the world is wanting to control how people perceive me or the impact that I have. And so something that has been really instrumental and formative for me is this notion of a fire and letting the fire burn. Because when we think about fire, we can think about when it keeps us warm, when it helps us cook our food. We are fire's biggest fan, right? Thank you, fire, because I'm not trying to be cold and eat raw food all the time, right? But then we turn around and we judge fire as negative when there's a forest fire or an accident where something gets burned down, right? And what I've been thinking a lot about is the fire doesn't ask for anybody's opinion. The fire doesn't care if you like it or not. And it's really about just letting the fire burn, because that's its purpose. So that's something that I'm really learning about myself. And I'm not there yet. So this is certainly a work in progress, if you will, but learning to remember, I will say remember, because I think that's really important. Remember that I am worthy. I am deserving simply for being, right? Not because I have a partner, not because I have friends, not because I've accomplished things in my career, but because I am worthy. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting because I think I lost sight of that for a long time. I felt I had sort of this mask of confidence, but underneath I was still striving. I'll say this, let me back up, because I'll say in terms of that confidence and the mask of confidence, I think part of that mask was because for a long time, I have been very comfortable saying, I don't care if people like me or not. Mm-hmm. I recognize that out of 8 billion people on the planet, not everyone's going to like me, and that's okay. But I see other people who struggle to be liked and to please people. And so I thought that wasn't my issue. I thought, I have confidence. I don't care if people like me. But what I found in this digging is I actually have deep insecurities that show up in a different way, because the way my insecurities show up were wanting for people to respect my ideas, to listen to what I had to say. So it wasn't just about being liked. It was about creating change in people. And I realized that I was putting my own beliefs about my value as a human being in whether or not I was able to inspire people to change or to grow. Mm-hmm. And so something else I've learned about myself is, no, I don't need to do any of that. I don't need to do anything in order to prove that I am worthy or valuable as a human being. And so I think that's something that's been really beautiful. Again, not something I've checked a box on. I still have days where I struggle with it, but I think that is really important for me, because in order to truly live into this calling or this purpose, I believe that the most important thing I can do on that path is learning to love and integrate all parts of who I am. And so with this mask of confidence, it allowed me to avoid kind of looking into the dark spaces of who I was. And so without doing that, without integrating these parts that I had abandoned or these parts that I felt ashamed about, if I fail to integrate that, then there's no way I can live into my calling. Because for me, I believe that living into my calling and my purpose requires every part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. That's deep stuff, right? Like that is not your, Netflix series, like lighthearted, like easy to watch stuff. Like that requires really getting honest with yourself and really challenging a lot of assumptions and beliefs and expectations, right? When you use the fire analogy, what comes up for me is like fire is fire. It just does its thing, right? Fire is not inherently good or bad. It depends on the context and how it serves whoever it serves, right?
Yep.
Forest fires are not good if it's destroying someone's home and it's, killing living creatures, for example. And yet, if a forest fire is pruning the forest naturally and making room for new growth and reducing the likelihood of more catastrophic fires down the road, then that could be described as good. I remember a workshop I attended a long time ago where you just use photographs, right? There were 4, and I'll talk about 2. And one was of a tree that had fallen across somebody's driveway. And so they said, well, what do you see? And some people in the room are like, oh, that's terrible. The tree fell and We're going to have somebody come and remove it. Bad. And then the other people were like, oh my God, I wanted that tree gone. And it was going to cost me like $1,900 to have it removed. And now it'll be like $400 to have it hauled off, right? The picture of this sweet little baby, with chubby cheeks and bright eyes and everything. And somebody was like, oh my gosh, wonderful baby, good, good, good. And somebody else is like, and that's number 9. And I don't know how I'm going to feed it, so it's not inherently good or bad. And I'm kind of getting off track here, but when you use the fire analogy and you talk about that as kind of a metaphor for the type of work that you're doing, it's like, if you look at fire and accept fire for what it is not good or bad. It can be harnessed in different ways. How it is allowed to be can have different results. And like, what expectations do we have of it in the first place when we go to use it? And when are we using it or harnessing it intentionally versus not really paying attention and letting it just kind of do its thing? And so you're really unpacking so many things.
Well, and I think that, even if we say like in certain contexts, fire is good, in certain contexts, it can be bad. But even our definition of what is good or bad is a judgment, right? That comes from our own experiences, our own conditioning, our own belief system. And so that's where, for me, I have come to this place of, if I feel that people are constantly criticizing me, if in this case I'm the fire and people are saying that I'm bad, what I'm learning to be true is almost like confirmation bias, right? We have these biases in our brain that have developed over a long period of time that aid us in our survival, but in today's society don't necessarily serve us. And what I found is, if I'm attaching to the people who dismiss me or the people who don't think I'm capable, that's a confirmation of my subconscious belief that I'm not capable or that I deserve to be dismissed or whatever it is. And so for me, it really comes back to, how do I accept myself as the fire without the judgments, without the labels? Because if I can do that truly, deeply, and embody that belief and knowing about myself, then I believe that the interactions I have with other people, I will start to see something different in those interactions because I have rewired my subconscious belief system.
I personally love that. What I love about that is, seeing myself in different ways. It's allowing yourself to take away the judgments and the labels, which is not easy for human beings, right? It's not easy for human beings. It's not easy in our society and our culture and so forth. So just the possibility and the opportunity that can create for you. What has or is changing for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Certainly how I show up every day, which seems small and big at the same time. It's definitely changing that. It's changing how I think about my purpose, how I go about taking action towards it. I think it has changed just my perspective about the world and about my place in the world. And I think that I'm learning to create joy and satisfaction in many smaller things. So one thing I'll say that has changed is, for a long time, I never really gave myself permission to do things that I thought were silly or quote unquote pointless, something that didn't serve the greater purpose that I was working towards, because I had this belief, this mindset, again, towards hustling and accomplishment. So anything that I was doing that felt frivolous or that didn't contribute to ultimately what I was trying to do in my life felt like a waste of time. Mm-hmm. Reading fiction books. I've always wanted to learn how to sing, but I always said, I'll learn how to sing down the line, because learning how to sing is not going to help me change the system we live in. That was kind of the perspective that I had. And you brought this point up earlier, Paul, of, in order to change the system, we must change ourselves. It all starts on the individual level. And so if I am frustrated by our obsession with hustling and achievement and constantly doing, well, then the way to change the system is to stop showing up that way. And so this year, I have given myself permission to read fiction because it brings me joy. I've read about 25 books this year, and that's like most of them fiction, a few nonfiction, but most of them fiction. And that's been amazing. I have taken singing lessons. I am giving myself permission to slow down and to be more present in my life, because I've been so focused on impact and purpose and legacy and all of these things. They've kept me anchored in this orientation toward the future that kept me from being truly present in each moment of my life. And again, not to say that I'm fully present all of the time. I'm not the Buddha, still a human living in this system, but more of the time I'm present, I'm joyful, I'm not worried about what other people are doing as much. I'm not on social media as much. I'm really engaged and really excited about the parts of me that have gone undiscovered or abandoned for so long. And I'm giving those parts of me permission to come out and play.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And it's like, it comes up for me is in our hustle culture is like, ooh, and how can that pay off for her long term? Like, oh my gosh, if she takes singing lessons today, like maybe she'll become a singer down the road. And it's like, maybe, but that's not the point, right? Like that. And what would happen for us if we stop trying to attach a point to everything that we do, right? Like it's okay to do it because you enjoy it and because it's part of who you are, and because maybe there's something that's in you that needs to express itself that doesn't have to be attached to an outcome or an identity or a future. That's what I'm seeing.
It is the point. The thing is the point, right? It is fulfilled in and of itself. So yes, I think you said that beautifully.
Nice. So, especially given what we've talked about, this next question, I'll just ask it and see what comes up for you, because it could seem like a leading question and it's not intended to be. But what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Ha! Great question. Ask me again in a few months. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a fair answer, by the way.
I think what's really interesting about this question is, I talked a lot about how we want to get off the comma, we want to push forward. So I think for me, part of it is not getting off the comma. Something I've learned about myself is if I don't have clarity about my next step, then the best thing I can do is not take a step. Because before, I was so convinced that I had to take action, I had to take a step forward, that I have made several steps in my life that, probably could have saved myself some time, money, heartache, energy, had I just waited a little bit. And so that for me is a huge part of my growth, is the fact that I'm not actively trying to get off the comma. However, what I will say is, while I'm on this comma, some of the other things I'm doing, for instance, for me, it really helps to break things down into pieces. So when it feels like this big nebulous topic of, oh, my purpose, I don't know what to do, it feels big, it feels overwhelming, and it feels really ambiguous. So something I've been doing with my therapist recently is starting to peel apart this topic of purpose and calling. And that's where a lot of our conversation today, I've been able to articulate recently, because of the work I've been doing with her, into these different levels. For me, instead of just thinking, oh my gosh, impact, I don't know what to do, it turns out I'm actually doing a lot of what I want to be doing on the micro impact scale. A lot of the work that I've done, I'm incredibly proud of how differently I show up with human beings on a day-to-day basis. So micro impact, I feel really good about that. And then I shared, I have this long-term vision for several years down the road that I can start putting energy toward, and that's going to help as well. And then this part where it still feels kind of sticky, not quite sure of, don't have the clarity, is kind of that middle level of impact at what I'll call, for me, is the organizational level. Like, how do I live in this system, knowing that I have something I'm working toward, but also knowing that I still want to be a force, a positive force for change inside of organizations. I do believe that my experience, my perspective, my expertise is valuable. So I am continuing to show up and use my voice and look for those opportunities to have an impact or make a change, however we want to characterize it, that feels aligned to my integrity and feels like I'm helping to move us in the direction that I believe will serve more human beings. And so for me, it's about breaking it down into those pieces instead of just allowing myself to feel completely overwhelmed and shut down, or feel this incredible pressure like I have to figure out capital P purpose tomorrow. It's really peeling it apart and realizing, okay, well, maybe these last couple of years, the growth and development I've been doing is to make sure that that micro impact is strong. And now I can, and now I have this vision, and now I can dedicate energy to that middle layer of impact. So I would say that is part of the work that I'm doing right now.
I would say that my observation, so this is a little bit of an acknowledgement for you, is that what I'm seeing in our conversation today, and from what I've known about you, is that the one impact you have consistently had is the impact on yourself. Micro, macro, and middle. So it's interesting that if that's your purpose, then you're very much living into that purpose.
Thank you. I hadn't thought about it in that light. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. I'm literally just mirroring it back to you, because that's what comes across very clearly for me in everything that you've talked about. Every example, as the impact has been for sure on yourself.
That is deeply meaningful to me. Thank you.
You are very welcome. And thank you for sharing that with us and allowing us to see this process and this journey. What would you, before we close it out, what would you acknowledge yourself for, from the conversation today?
I think I would acknowledge myself for my resilience, my perseverance, and my patience. I think I'm grateful that, I mentioned earlier, everything has led me to this point. And I'll say it's funny because I talk about this with some of my other friends who are really committed to this deep personal transformation work. And the misconception is, okay, I've overcome these barriers or these challenges so that I don't have any more challenges. And what I find to be true, spoiler alert, sorry if this is not what you want to hear, but for me, what I've found to be true is the more challenges I overcome, the bigger the challenges are next that I face. And I like to think about it almost like going to the gym and building my muscles, right? If I went into the gym having never been there before and tried to lift a huge barbell with a lot of weight on it, I would injure myself or I wouldn't be able to move it. And as I think about all of the work that I've been doing over the last decade, and especially over the last few years in particular in this arena, I see that I've gotten stronger. I see that I'm lifting weights that I've never lifted before. And yes, it's still hard because as we push ourselves and we want to lift more and more weight, if you will, in this analogy, it's still hard. It's still painful. We still get sore when we're pushing our muscles, when we're breaking them down so they can build up stronger. And so that's something that I feel really excited about is these challenges that I'm now overcoming. I would have been decimated by them years ago. And so I can see the progress. I see the growth. And so I think it's very important for me to think about it in that regard. And I'm building the muscle, continuing to show up for myself, for others. And yeah, it's been a really beautiful journey.
Yeah. Well, it brings us full circle to what you were describing at the very beginning, and that image of digging a hole on the beach. And as soon as you dig the hole, the water fills it up and brings the sand back in. And, so many people would just give up after one shot, but it's like, if you know that's going to happen every single time and nothing's going to stop that from happening, then you can redirect and reframe and say, how can I dig the hole differently? What different shapes? What joy can I derive, or what can I gain, or what value can there be in the digging itself, right? And even if you set all that other stuff aside, like as human beings, we're still just going to dig the damn hole and keep digging, right? So at the very least, we keep showing up, right? So
find joy in the digging. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's what you just described and I heard you say. So Carissa, where can people find you if they, were inspired by what you said or just want to learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, I would love if anything has resonated, if anyone has questions, wants to have a conversation about where they are on their purpose, or anything like that. I'd love. Hopefully it's become abundantly clear. I love human beings and I love new connections. So would love that. I'm on Instagram most of the time, most frequently, but not super frequently, as I mentioned. But I'm at Carissa Carbon. Very easy to find if you know how to spell my name. 1 C and 1 K. I know it's counterintuitive. I also have a website.
We'll have it in the show notes too. So
Perfect.
All of it will be there for folks.
Exactly. I've got a website, carissacarbon.com. I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of my work is in the professional domain, so I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, but would love to connect and hear your story.
And also, I do this with every guest. It's an invitation, but not an expectation. But because we're talking about humans and giving humans voices and letting humans tell their stories, are there any organizations or creators or other individuals that you would like to lift up or give a little bit of an extra boost or shout out or some publicity to?
I would say I have two that come to mind based on this conversation. The first one I would say is Brene Brown. For any Harry Potter fans out there, I say Brene is my Patronus. I love Brene Brown. All of her books have been deeply meaningful to me. Podcast, everything she does, I think is incredible. So highly would recommend any of her work, especially if anybody's interested in kind of diving into themselves, starting with the gifts of imperfection and working their way up would be great. And then another author that I think is really worth mentioning here is Todd Rose. He's written a couple of books that have been really impactful for me. The End of Average, but then most recently he wrote a book called Collective Illusions. And I think it really ties to the point we were mentioning of speaking our truth to speak our truth. And in this book, Collective Illusions, the premise is basically that we are living with these illusions that even if we don't necessarily agree with this societal standard or expectation, we assume that everybody else does. So we don't say anything about it. When in reality, it turns out most people don't agree with it. But again, that's where the importance of just using our voice, because we don't know. We make assumptions that because someone didn't speak up, they must agree with it. And that's just not necessarily the case. So Collective Illusions is a really great one. If anybody's interested in learning more about the silly little ways we humans like to stay small.
Yeah. The age-old tales, right? The emperor has no clothes, right? So
Exactly.
I will be checking that one out. Thank you very much. I will put this information in the show notes as well, so it's easy for people to find. Very much enjoyed having you with us today, and thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability and sharing your story with us. And I look forward to personally having our next conversation off the microphone. But thank you again.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much. It's been a joy, a privilege, and an honor. And thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for creating this podcast. Thank you for showing up the way that you do. It's very meaningful and impactful.
Thank you for that. It's an honor. I'm very excited to see where this continues to grow and evolve. So, all right. Thanks, Carissa, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
What an honor it is to witness these stories from these amazing human beings, and today's guest was no exception. I invite you to think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. I can't tell you how magical it can be to set aside your expectations and just let your thoughts flow out of your head and onto paper. You don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can be amazed at what comes out of your thoughts and onto paper and what that can do for you. I know freestyle journaling has been a powerful practice in my life for a very long time. You just never know what you might discover about yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. Follow me on social media at Off the Comma, and also look for upcoming workshops and events at offthecomma.com, or better yet, go to offthecomma.com and sign up for my mailing list and let me bring the news directly to you. I am passionate about keeping this podcast ad-free so that we create a safe container for people to be able to tell their stories uninterrupted by commercials and promotions. I currently cover all the production costs, and I'm happy to continue doing so. And I'm also open to and appreciative of any donations that anyone would like to contribute. This is nothing more than to be able to support the podcast and cover some of the monthly editing and producing and equipment costs that are associated with this podcast. So look for the donations link in the podcast descriptions wherever you find this podcast. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast, and more importantly, spread the good word. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. As always, keep noticing.